You know, it's interesting. I was reading some of the blog comments on that particular ad, and there were some that thought it was a bit disingenuous that, you know, Tim Hortons was so much a symbol of Canada. But as somebody who's not Canadian by birth, to me that to me seemed so perfect, because I think of Tim's as being so much a part of the Canadian diaspora that it made perfectly moving sense to me. And it helps to have a simple and clear message. One of the things that we see, anybody who does new product development, and they say, well, you know what, when I did the simulated test market, this was going to be a hit, and when I ran the advertising, it wasn't. Well, we benefit load in concept tests. It does this, and this, and this, and this, and this. We can't do that in advertising. We need simple, clear, understandable messages, and piling more information into an ad is a killer. Most likely thing to destroy a good ad. So the HSBC ads are a good example. And I'll reconnect this for you on the return to creativity with some actual numbers here. So how do you get from good to great? This is sort of a bit of a follow-on from what we talked about earlier. Almost every time we see brilliant creative that fails, it's the point that Arthur made, which is the strategy wasn't right in the first place. So if I could argue there's one place where you should put increased time, energy, and frankly dollars, it's in developing that strategy before you let anybody put pencil to paper and try and develop creative. Make sure you've got the big idea, and that big idea fits with your brand. You know, if you go back, I'll go back to the car again. You know, this is not your father's Oldsmobile. Well, yes, it is. You know, that is not a big idea that fit with the brand. Get feedback early in the process. I kind of disagree with Arthur, and I'll show you an example of this on whether you can test early and get good feedback. I think if you're committed to really trying to express the idea of the execution, because it's not just ideas that fail. Executions can, in fact, fail. You know, the law of unintended consequences. You make a little tweak, and you don't realize that you've fundamentally changed the ad. So getting feedback early in the process, I think, enhances the return on creativity. And for you guys in Canada, I think it's a real shame that more and more often you're being asked to redeploy advertising that was done someplace else. I think people who haven't spent a lot of time in this country don't recognize how genuinely unique and different, and how there's nothing more offensive to a Canadian than being treated like the 51st state, and if you live in Montreal, being treated like the 52nd. So I would say, even if you're forced to redeploy advertising from someplace else, it's worth getting feedback. Frankly, it's your best weapon when somebody's trying to make you use advertising that really is not right for this market. Because again, little changes can make big differences. And I think there are a lot of things that we think we can't understand. Emotions. You know, can you really ask people how they feel? I'm a little bit of a, you know, recognize my own cynicism. This idea that we can't express how we feel, well, you know, if we couldn't express how we feel, we'd never get married, we'd never have sex, we'd never buy cars that cost $100,000. I mean, there are all kinds of things that are driven by emotions that we can express. But we're getting even more interesting new ways to measure emotions amongst the people who can't all that articulately express them. And we'll show you some examples here. Oops. So this is an example of getting early feedback. I don't know how many people are familiar with the Diageo ad. It won the Grand Prix at Cannes in, I believe, 2008. It's called Know It You Love. Has anybody, quick show of hands, people seen this? Okay, so this didn't air very broadly outside of the UK. Know It You Love is actually evolution spelled backwards. I saw this ad a lot of times before I figured that out. But when you see it, I'll play the finished film for you after this. You'd say, oh, please, nobody could ever test that in animatics. Same with the iconic Guinness Surfer ad. But the truth is, these ads were tested early. They were improved and went on to be incredibly successful ads. So you can see in these animatics these quite funny drawings, and without showing you the whole storyboard, you don't get the story. But I'm going to show you the finished film, what came out of this test.
The rhythm of life is a powerful beat. Puts a tingle in your fingers and a tingle in your feet. Rhythm in your bedroom, rhythm in the street. Yes, the rhythm of life is a powerful beat. And the rhythm of life is a powerful beat. Puts a tingle in your fingers and a tingle in your feet. Rhythm in your bedroom, rhythm in the street. Yes, the rhythm of life is a powerful beat. Flip your wings and fly to your daddy. Take a dive and swim to your daddy. Hit the floor and rock his daddy. That's the rhythm of life,
You can stop it here. There's a little bit on the end that you can stop. So, you know, that would have been the kind of ad that everybody said, oh, please, you can't pre-test that ad. But in fact, we did and had some great recommendations that went on to be very, very successful. So when it all comes together, here's a great Canadian example.
He's not a vampire, Dad. He's goth. There's a difference.
Yeah, sure. Pizza?
Ooh, who delivered?
Actually, it's new Delisio garlic bread pizza.
Garlic in the crust. You can really taste it.
Oh, you can taste the garlic, all right.
Hi, Jake. Pizza?
Garlic?
What you say?
See? Vampire. Told you.
It's not delivery. It's Delisio. New Delisio garlic bread pizza.
Now, talk about return on creativity. That ad tested, it has actually the highest persuasion score of any ad we've ever tested in Canada, but it also scored really well on being well branded, and it actually is in a stratosphere that only about 3% of all ads ever do well. Branding and persuasion often move in opposite directions, believe it or not. This ad did brilliantly on both of them, so great example, and delivered probably the 2 SKUs in this line delivered the #1 and #2 most successful frozen pizza launches in Canada of the past 3 years. So real positive return there. So, oops, can you stop that for a second? Can you stop the film for a second so I can explain that? Thank you. So the next thing I'm going to show you is just an example of how we're getting closer and closer to understanding the emotional power of advertising. And again, this sort of idea of law of unintended consequences and why we think testing early makes sense. So go ahead and roll that. And pay attention to the red dots for me.
Raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, bright copper kettles and warm woolen mittens, brown paper packages tied up with strings. These are a few of my favorite things. When the dog bites, when the bee stings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so bad.
So those red dots are eye tracking, and I saw a lot of great eye tracking technology in the exhibition. Well worth taking a look at. This ad was really interesting in that it did a great job for Skoda, which is the make, but it didn't do a particularly great job for the model. And anybody have an idea of why that is? The key is in the red dots. So each of those red dots are where somebody's eyes went. And if you watch through the whole ad, they tended to be quite clustered. People were moving together in what they were seeing. And when the baker glued the Skoda logo on, all eyes were on that. This is the only place they show the model. And look where everybody's eyes are. They're all over the place. Really, really, really simple diagnostics around how this ad could have been improved and optimized in service of the model as well as the make. The other thing is because it was so strongly associated with the make rather than the model, this ad had, not surprisingly, with Julie Andrews in the background, a very feminine kind of gestalt to it, which is fine if Skoda's okay with their whole line being perceived as feminine, but that's probably not what they were going for. So great example of stuff that we wouldn't have been able to necessarily get to through questioning that kind of biometric feedback can help us with. And this is also a form of biometric feedback. The green line is emotion coming from brainwave measurement. So the green line was emotion coming from actually EEG brainwave measurement in real time being done as part of a link test. The blue line was cognition. And you could see during that part where they start photoshopping her, people don't know what's going on, but it bugs them. Right? They're starting to feel something. this stuff isn't, you know, sci-fi. This isn't the future. This is today. This is the kind of work we can do today to better understand. And I think it's, again, going to be a real source of great incorporative learning for us. So let's kind of connect this all back to the idea of return on creativity. I think Audi is a really good example of a brand that's been creative on many, many, many fronts. Its vehicle design is creative. Its advertising is creative. Even some of its marketing and distribution strategies. And in spite of the kind of debacle of the last couple of years that we've been through, in 2009, Audi managed to eke out a 1.6 billion euro profit. And with, you know, auto sales dropping off dramatically, they only dropped in unit sales about 5% in 2009. So fabulous return on creativity for that brand. HSBC is a sort of a different example. This is a brand equity growth story. This is a pyramid that we use to kind of figure out how bonded people are with the brand. And you won't be surprised to know that people don't actually bond all that closely with their bank. It's, you know, you have to feel like it's the only bank who can do this for me, and that's not a very typical emotion for one to have about their bank. But you can see in 2004, HSBC suffered from all kinds of weak equities. People didn't know who they were. They weren't relevant to them. But through really great creative and media targeting, and I think this is a great example of media and creative working really well together, they've now developed the reputation for being a genuine sort of internationalist brand that thrives on diversity, and you can see the payback in their brand equity growth. Nike, again, last year in 2009, we saw a lot of brands see their brand value actually erode. Nike still managed to eke out a 5% growth, and the brand is now worth $13 billion. And as a little throwaway aside on the power of copy testing, I've got to believe in my heart of hearts that had Nike copy tested Tiger's confessional ad, it wouldn't have seen the light of day. So, you know, a little plug for, I actually do think you can avert some disasters by getting feedback. And we talked a little bit about Delisio already. Now here's the real test though. You know, anybody who works for a public company, who has shares in that company, anybody who has a performance-based compensation deal with their client wants to work with pink line brands, not gray line brands. This is how the most valuable brands in the world, and these are not brands that have the biggest dollar value, but where the brand is a strong contributor to the valuation. So they're brands where the brand contribution is very, very high. Over the last 5 years, a portfolio of those brands would have grown 18.5%, even with the meltdown of 2009. And what you can see is from sort of the darkest days of the recession, how much more quickly those brands have come back. So I hope I've been able to persuade you that there's an incredible financial return on creativity, and that creativity can in fact be enhanced through the power and the value of insight and research. And